Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Uri Burstyn, and I'm joined here by Mr. Pirate the Cat to answer one of the most commonly asked questions that I ever get asked in my veterinary practice. And that is, should I feed wet or dry food to my cat, and does it really matter? Which is surprisingly a relatively complicated question to answer. So at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you guys what I usually tell my clients when they ask me this question, but I just want to give you guys a little bit of context. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of dog and cat food as it is manufactured and the reasons why people might feed dry or wet food preferentially. Dog and cat food has been being made for about 100 years. I think an early 20th century invention. And in the early stages of this industry, really companies were just trying to find something to do with the leftovers of human food production. And they just realized that if you turn them into something you can market for pet owners, you can make a little bit of extra money. And it all began with dog kibble, with food being dried up and pressed into these little pellets that we all know and love as kibbles. And then a little bit later, the canning industry got in on the job, and people were just experimenting, trying to make different products. Some of them came out as kibbles, some of them came out as canned food, but nobody was really paying too much attention to nutrition. It was mostly driven by marketing and profits. And then over the last 100 years, obviously there's been a lot of fine tuning, and these days, cat and dog food is probably some of the most highly engineered food products that are available in the market. The key thing here that I really want everybody to understand, that I'm going to dispel like a big myth right off the bat, is that there's really no difference nutritionally between dry and wet food. You take the same type and brand of food, and the kibble and the wet food are essentially the same thing. The major difference being just the moisture content. So kibble has like a 5 to 10% moisture content, and wet food could have anywhere from like 35 to 50% moisture content. But nutritionally, they're more or less the same. So right off the bat, I'm going to reframe the question from what should you feed your cat, wet or dry food, to looking at the reasons why people feed their cat wet or dry food. And I think those reasons can be broken down into 4 categories. The primary one being convenience, then maybe concerns about their teeth and oral health, general health and nutrition, and then the 4th one that I kind of wish more people thought about, which is environmental stimulation and kind of the cat's own experience of eating the food. So let's start with convenience. Like it or not, convenience plays a massive role in our decisions about our pets. We know that 70% of people pick their veterinarian based on convenience and proximity to their house, which is probably the worst way to pick a doctor, but it's just the way people behave. And I think the same thing happens with cat food, where people will really gravitate towards the simplest, most convenient option, which is probably why feeding kibble is often the default, and why people tend to just buy cat food, same place they buy their own groceries, at the local store. If there's a pet store that's convenient to them, they might go there. But really, people tend to default to whatever is easiest. And certainly kibble has the advantage of being relatively easy to feed. A lot of people just fill up a bowl and just leave it out for the cat to munch on. If you go away for a few days, many people will just leave a bunch of kibble out and hope that the cat doesn't eat it all on the first day, which with some cats is maybe a false hope. But really, convenience plays a big role. Wet food certainly has to be put out a little bit more regularly. People are often worried about it going off if it's left out for too long, which they really shouldn't be. It's fine to be left out for 24 hours unless you live somewhere very hot and tropical, or you have a thieving dog in the house. And I think that this idea of this convenience and being able to leave food out is really a big driver for people. And it's also kind of lines up with the way cats naturally eat. I have a whole video called Understanding How Cats Eat, and you can find a link to it in the description below. But cats are trickle feeders, so they like to go to their dish multiple times throughout the day and have a little meal. It kind of aligns with the way they would eat in the wild, which was to hunt and kill a little mouse, kill a little bird, eat it, go hunt another one. And we know that from studies that cats will naturally have 14 to 16 meals a day when they're out hunting and fending for themselves. And so this big convenience factor is actually one reason that I'm super excited to present the sponsor of today's video, which is the first automated wet cat food feeder I have ever seen. So the Pet Libro Polar Wet Food Feeder is an awesome, awesome tool that I'm really, really excited to talk about. I get a lot of companies reaching out to me asking to sponsor videos, and I'm pretty choosy about the products that I talk about specifically. But this one is awesome. It's actually a little refrigeration unit that keeps wet food fresh for up to 72 hours inside of it. And then there's a timed feeder component. So we've all seen little timed dry food feeders that dispense kibble at certain times. Well, this thing will dispense wet food at times preset using their handy dandy little app, which is very easy to use. And I use the Pet Libra app for the water fountain that I use in my house as well. And this lets you set regular feeding times throughout your day, whether you're home or if you're away. And this is kind of a good solution. If you just want to be away for 24 hours and you need to feed your cats, and your cats have to be on wet food, well, this is a really great option. Also kind of alleviates some of those concerns people have, particularly if you live in a really hot climate, about having canned food out all day. Might attract flies, might go off. Well, not in this case. This allows you to set feeding times, and then the little lid will open and the cats can get in there and have a little meal, and then it'll close again. They have a little infrared sensor there to make sure that no paws get trapped. And unlike dry food feeders, this one is very cat-proof. They can't get their paw in there and get it open themselves, which is an issue with many kind of dry food dispensers. Cats are very, very good at breaking into them. They're surprisingly good at breaking into them. So this is a really exciting little tool for feeding your cats. And honestly, I use it at home just to make my life easier because, frankly speaking, like I set it to open up in the morning so that there's just, I am not a morning person. There's just one less thing for me to do while I'm trying to get myself together and get to work more or less on time. It's nice to just have a little feeder open up for the cats. And actually, instead of doing like 3 meals a day, what I do is I'll actually set it to open every hour for half an hour. So actually, the cats will get their little multiple meals throughout the day while I'm out of the house. Makes me feel better. I think it's kind of a cool thing to do for them, and it kind of supports their natural feeding patterns. And again, obviously, an automatic pet food feeder is not a replacement for a cat sitter if you go away on a trip. But if you're going to be out of the house for like 12 to 24 hours and your cats don't require any special monitoring, I think it's a great option to have in your little toolkit for taking care of your furry little friends. When the Pet Libro Polar Automatic Cat Food Feeder opens, it lets off a little ding, which is an auditory cue that will train your cats to go and investigate the food dish. So I thought that was kind of a cool feature as well. It takes them a few times to kind of get used to it, but once they do, they'll figure it out and kind of guard it and run over when they hear dings. So that's pretty cool too. So yeah, it's just like a really exciting tool because it takes that convenience factor out of the decision of whether you're going to feed your cat wet or dry food. And I think Mr. Pirate actually wants to go check on the feeder right now. Bye, little dude. See you in a bit. Hopefully he'll come back for the later half of this video. Let's talk a little bit about the second of the 4 factors that might weigh in your decision whether to feed your pet wet or dry food. Oral health. This is something people really worry about a lot these days, and I'm really happy to hear it. Again, I have a video doing a deep dive into why we should worry about cat and dog oral health. And again, links in the description below. I do like a really thorough description and thorough discussion of why we worry about oral health in our pets and what we can do about it. If you watch that video, you will realize that oral health is actually a multifactorial challenge. So food does play a role in your pet's oral health, but it's going to be a fairly minor role most of the time. So even though people think that if you feed your cat dry food rather than wet, their teeth will be better, it's not necessarily true. There might be a really, really small difference between most wet foods and dry foods, but really it's not going to be enough to impact the thing that really matters, which is kind of the frequency with which your cat will need its teeth cleaned under anesthetic throughout its life. The only exception to that is if you're feeding a prescription dental health food, of which there's only 2. That's like Hill's TD, and Royal Canin Dental. And those foods do play a role in maintaining your cat's health, but it's a pretty specific role. It's not for all cats. If you have the kind of cat who needs like their teeth cleaned every year or two, then you might want to consider using one of those foods to kind of reduce the frequency of dental cleanings. But for most animals with average dental health, they're not necessarily a game changer. And of course, they're only available in dry food, and there's reasons why you may or may not want to feed this food to your cat. Probably something really good to talk to about with your family veterinarian if you are worried about your pet's oral health and want to minimize their dental cleanings. But in general terms, feeding kibble versus wet food isn't going to make a huge difference to their oral health. They're still going to need dental care throughout their life, and the frequency isn't going to change that much. Now, where there is a difference between wet and dry food is more when you get into the realm of general health, specifically as it links to hydration. I have a whole series of videos on my channel about old cat health conditions, chronic renal insufficiency, hyperthyroidism, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease. All of these conditions are affected by the cat's hydration, and in all of these, being well hydrated is protective. In a video that I made about how much should cats drink, again, link in the description below, I'm going to get tired of saying that soon, I talk a little bit about the fact that cats, being little desert animals who evolved to live in an environment without a lot of running water, actually get a lot of the moisture from their food. And remember, kibble is not devoid of moisture. It's just relatively low in it. So in cats who are predisposed to these health conditions or who have a health condition, then the water content of the food does play a significant role. But here you will be getting more into prescription diets, because as your cat ages or develops health conditions, we have prescription diets specifically designed to manage most common health conditions. And they're something your veterinarian should be recommending to you if they're going to, because they're like a really useful tool in managing cat health. For example, with kidney disease, we know that getting them on an appropriate kidney diet is literally the biggest, most impactful thing you can do to support their health and extend their life. And most importantly, getting them on the appropriate kidney diet to their life stage, because there's multiple kidney diets available, and you don't want to put them all on like Hill's KD, which used to be the case, but you can actually have to match their diet to their stage of their kidney disease, and that way you can really make a huge positive difference in their life. So in that regard, it does play a big role, but that's usually linked to a clinical diagnosis. The last of the 4 factors I want to talk about is environmental enrichment or behavioral enrichment. So what does this really mean? When we talk about environmental enrichment, what we talk about is the mental welfare of our pets. It really just is linked to giving them things to do, keeping them interested. In cats, boredom equals stress. We have to keep their life engaging. And there's so many ways we can do that, and food does play a role. I mean, this is just a huge, huge topic to talk about. The things I really think about when I think about food and environmental enrichment is puzzle feeders. And this is where dry food really kind of shines, and it's actually a strong argument for feeding kibble or dry food to cats in some situations, because most puzzle feeders, there's a ton of different models out there, but most of them only work with dry food. I'm going to probably make a whole video on puzzle feeders. I haven't done it yet, but it's such a cool topic because there's so many options out there. Everything from things that look like a mat with little like spikes on it that the cats have to dig kibbles out of, to things that look like graduated cylinders, to little balls that roll around and bat to get food fall out. All of these things basically gamify eating for cats, which is really, really good for their mental health and also helps reduce obesity. Really, there's no really good reason for your cat to be eating kibble out of a bowl, is what I'm trying to say. And that's really kind of a message that often gets lost, but there's so many better ways to feed a cat kibble than out of a bowl. And again, this is where maybe an automatic cat feeder might play a role in engaging cats with wet food, because there's really not much you can do in terms of puzzle feeding with wet food, at least not that I've seen on the market. You can certainly play around with it, but it's going to get messy. And I figure having like a little wet food dish that opens up at random times throughout the day might simulate a bit of a hunting environment. So who knows? That's something you could play with because we know that just keeping cats engaged with their food simulates hunting behavior, which is something that makes them a little bit more, I guess, emotionally and behaviorally adapted, and really helps them when they live indoors and don't have anything to hunt other than your socks or the whatever toys you choose to throw for them. So that's something that's really worth thinking about as well. So now I'm going to tell you guys what I tell my clients in the consult room when they come to me and say, hey, should I be feeding dry or wet food to my cat? And what I tell my clients, and remember, this is me as I'm a family veterinarian most of my days. People come to me off the street. They often have a kitten. Sometimes they have an adult cat they adopted. Sometimes they have a geriatric cat, and they throw these questions at me. And as a veterinarian, we're always in this challenging position where we don't want to be seen as like selling stuff, right? And for some reason, people just take a weird exception to veterinarians recommending diets because they think that we're all these, nefarious agents of the massive pet food industry, which is not true. There's no such thing as a massive pet food industry. But veterinarians are oddly hesitant to recommend foods that are healthy for your cat because 9 times out of 10, if I do that all day long, during my day, somebody is going to accuse me of trying to, sell them food, which is obviously what I am trying to do, because it's just trying to sell people food that's healthy for their cat, unlike the pet store, which is trying to sell them whatever food, they have. But so my recommendations are kind of tactical. And what I tell people is that, it really doesn't matter that much whether you feed your cat wet or dry food when they're a kitten or a young, healthy adult cat. And I usually don't go into it much deeper than that. And I just say, buy whatever you want, feed your cat. It's kind of like when we were teenagers, right? You can eat whatever you want and you get away with it. But as you age, nutrition becomes a little bit more important. So my recommendation is to feed cats wet food only after the age of 10. And the reason for that is primarily because we know that statistically after that age is when they will start developing these age-related health conditions, and that keeping a cat on wet food will keep them a little bit better hydrated, or at least more reliably hydrated. So if your cat does develop, renal issues sometime between vet visits, being better hydrated is going to be protective. It's going to mean that they're going to be in better shape when they are diagnosed. It also limits obesity. So because wet food has a higher moisture content, it's a little harder for a cat to get fat eating wet food. Not impossible, but harder. And the general rule of thumb, you take any fat cat eating dry food, you switch them to wet food of exactly the same brand, and they will lose weight. So generally speaking, because obesity and these health conditions tend to come up in older cats as they age, I tend to recommend feeding wet food only to cats over the age of 10. Now, are there exceptions to this? Absolutely. But they're relatively few and far between, so I'm not going to necessarily dive into them. Earlier in life, it makes sense to me to feed cats both dry and wet food so they have exposure to both. Oh, hello, Mr. P. You're back. Mr. Pyre went off for a little snack. So yeah, when their cats are young, because cats can get addicted to textures as well as flavors, it's good to expose them to different diets. So your kittens, you want to expose them to both wet and dry food. But again, nutritionally, it's probably not going to make a huge difference. And that way, later in life, when you maybe do really need to feed them, say, wet food because they've gotten really obese, or a specific prescription diet because it's going to help you manage their health, if they've been exposed to different types of food earlier in life, they're going to be much easier to switch to the new food. And I have a video on my channel talking about how cats eat and how to get cats to eat new food. And the reason I made those videos is because it can be such a challenge. So that's my 2 cents on whether you should feed your cat wet or dry food. I hope you find this video helpful. Please pet that subscribe button and squish the bell notification icons so that you get notifications of my videos as they come out. And if you find my advice helpful, please come support my work on Patreon. I couldn't do it without my patrons, and there's a link below in the description. Please come and help me make more of these videos. And I also do some second opinion consulting through Patreon. So if you guys ever want my help with your own pet's health, you can reach out no matter where you are in the world, and maybe I can be of some use. So thank you for watching, and hope you have a really nice day.